Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter, and I'm recording this after a delightful conversation that Mahesh and I had with the writer we have long admired, Mudar Patherya. Mudar was a full-time cricket writer for the Sportsworld magazine for most of the 1980s. He covered a number of tours in places as diverse as Pakistan, West Indies, and Sharjah, and of course within India, and wrote 4 books on the game. Anyone who has read him would have sensed the breadth of knowledge, energy, and wit that he brought to his pieces. It was writing with so much creativity and passion that many of his contemporaries are happy to admit that he was one of the finest cricket writers we have had. I normally do an introduction before starting the chat, but Mudar was so chatty right from the first minute that I didn't want to stop his flow of thought. I simply pressed the record button and lapped up his stories.
In the air, Sharjah takes it! India win!
He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series.
They're going to get back for 2. India at home. Lords goes wild.
So at one point in time, somebody offered me the entire collection of Sports Worlds. And I thought, that it would be a great tragedy if I didn't buy it. So I ended up paying some 10,000-12,000 rupees. I bought the entire bloody collection. I think I don't refer to it very often, but I think it's a good solace to have that, anytime. So I did collect all my articles, from 1980 onwards to 1990. I went through the prominent articles and I got them scanned because I had a scanner in the office. So today I've got a reasonable collection of my own stuff. I think Ayaz Memon wanted to write a book last year, bibliography, or rather anthology on Indian cricket. So he said, something has appeared on Lala Amarnath in the 80s. I said, yeah, 86, January. I wrote the article. So he said, get it for me. So I gave it to him in about, 3 hours because it was all scanned in my hard disk.
Oh, wow. So maybe...
So I'll tell you, somewhere this streak for documentation, putting things together, archiving is actually one of our DNA legacies that I do have. My father was a very big archivist. He archived his own life. No letter was ever thrown away. So here too, I think from 1974, 75, 72, 73, in fact, all the test series that India played, I used to cut them out of the Statesman and I used to create my scrapbooks. So, the amazing thing was, I didn't realize it then, and this is what is all about connecting life backwards, that, when I took all these clippings out and I put them into the hardbound exercise books, what I actually developed, and I didn't realize it then, was the ability to make a great page, how to design, because you had finite space and you had funny angles of articles. Articles never followed any shape. No? One could be long and the other could be short. So how do you size it into a particular finite space, which doesn't change from page to page? And apart from cricket, which of course was the core benefit, the spin-off benefit was excellent page making. So in the early 80s, when I joined Sportsworld, they couldn't figure out how does this clown know how to make a good page. I'd been doing it for nearly 9 years, yeah, because I'd been making my own pages, yeah, with gum and Fevicol and pasting it. And whenever you had a big tournament like the World Table Tennis Tournament in 1975, that merited a larger notebook. That notebook was large. So all the articles, so anything that would have appeared in the Statesman 3 days before the tournament and 10 days after the tournament, it was all there in the scrapbook. So as a result, one picked up names, one picked up matches, one picked up, photographs. I could look at a photograph and say, this bloody stupid photograph, bad quality printing, 1974 Statesman. That's what I had grown up with, We weren't affluent to order the Cricketer International in those days. So Statesman was our cricketer, it was our Wisden cricket once, it was everything. So one just went through that so extensively that it became your DNA in your memory.
And I think like scores that you talk about, I mean, that's the other thing that happens then, because that scorecard becomes sacred. Because you don't have another source.
So once the scorecard becomes sacred, and more importantly, at a most distilled level, numbers become very, very special in your memory. If you tell me 38, well, Chandra Oval, 1971. You tell me 221, it's got a distinctive memory. You tell me 57 is Gavaskar's greatest innings in England, what he considered. 96 is possibly in my mind what would be Gavaskar's greatest innings. So every number becomes special to you. And that's how, somebody tells you, do you have a great memory for faces? I said, yeah, I don't remember your face. I'm so sorry. You'll have to introduce yourself. But not with numbers. Somewhere I have a belief that numbers, the yen for numbers, the affinity for numbers, were all very cricket derived and very cricket inspired. If it hadn't been for cricket as a numerical marker in my life, maybe I would have just remembered faces and not remembered numbers. But numbers is what we live for. We knew statistics, 99.94. You don't have to tell me what it is, boss. We know. The second ball, 1948 Oval, Eric Hollies, we know what it stands for. So I think these get built up in the mind and suddenly, you develop a yen for numbers. I think it was very cricket derived. Today, sadly, that part of memory is completely gone. It's been obliterated because there's just so much of it happening. So I don't remember anything.
And even numbers, even in normal life, like we used to remember at least 15, 24 numbers back in the day. And in fact, we had Sharjah on the podcast recently, and she remembered the number that she called when she had to get in touch with Sachin Tendulkar in 1989. She remembered his home residence landline number. How many numbers do we remember today?
So, even though I have not sent Kapil Dev a letter for the last maybe 35 years, I still remember 39 Sundarnagar, New Delhi. So, these things become very important. So I'll tell you this fascinating memory about this guy. I think Jeffrey Archer writes about him, about this cop. And he wants to stay awake at night because he knows that the person he's tracking is in the house beyond. And he doesn't want to fall asleep. So he keeps memorizing the cricket statistics right through the night and staying awake. And I found that to be quite an amazing thing to happen. Somebody actually wrote about it. It's our life.
Wow. I somehow don't remember this at all, though I've read quite a lot of him.
Jeffrey Archer. No, Jeffrey Archer, the cop sitting outside and he's wanting to keep awake because the villain is inside. The only way he can keep himself awake is by, keeping on rattling off the statistics one after another. That's how he stays awake.
Beautiful.
So, I'll tell you one of the things that I did in 1982, England versus Pakistan, the series was on. I would clue into the BBC. So, 3:30 the match would start, 3:30 Indian Standard Time. The match would end at about 10:30, quarter to 11 at night. And I had this running pact with the Telegraph that, I'm going to hear the entire commentary. And even though that nobody's going to give you who scored how much in how many minutes, how many balls for, all those kind of arcane statistics, at 10:50 p.m. at night, 20 minutes after the match ends, I will be at your desk and I shall have given you the full scorecard of the minutes, because I would keep hearing the BBC and keep noting them down. And anytime they repeated, I would keep cross-checking. So I created an entire grid by which I could map the entire statistical outline of the match as it progressed. So at 10:50 at night, they would hold the sports pages for me, knowing that I would come up with the scorecard of the England-Pakistan test match. This is not even England-India. England-Pakistan, but they were very nice enough to carry those scorecards.
Oh, and you were working for them then, were you?
No, I was working for Sportsworld. Okay. So my job would finish at 5:30. But from 3:30 in the afternoon, even while I was in office, I would be clued into what was happening in the test match and keep noting down. Okay. And the moment it was lunch in UK, I'd jazz off home. Because my house is not very far. It's about a 10-minute walk from the Anand Bazaar office. And I'd be home in the space of about 10 minutes. And from home, I would track the entire match right at the end of the day.
This is amazing. How much of that series do you remember now?
82, I remember reasonably. I remember that Mudassar would be the man with the golden arm. He would come in and pick up wickets. And I remember it largely for the memory of that one man who virtually bobbed that entire summer of 1982 alive for me. And that man was Abdul Qadir. When I went in Pakistan in 82, I went in the month of November, late November. One of the first things that I did when I reached Lahore, of course, first thing that I did was to take the night bus to Sahiwal, because India was playing in Sahiwal, a place that used to be called Montgomery in the good old days. And Sahiwal, I reached in the morning and I went and reported the match. But the moment I returned from Sahiwal with the Indian team, and this was incredible for me because I was 19 years old and the Indian team was in the same bloody train compartment as I was. It wasn't a second class AC, it was a third class. And we used to call it third class. Third class is basically three-tiered, non-AC. And the one memory that I have of that, of course, Qasim Umar sitting beside me, and the one memory that I have is quite incredible, is that even though it was a moving train, Ashraf Ali, the wicketkeeper, actually said his prayers on the bloody bunk. I'm a practicing Muslim, but I couldn't believe that somebody could actually say his prayers on the bloody bunk. But that's what he did, and that quite blew me out. And all the cricketers are all trooped out at the Lahore railway station. And I think next evening, I had tracked Abdul Qadir down to Dharampura. He used to stay at a place called Dharampura. Because, we go to Zaman Park, and a little beyond Zaman Park, and then you turn right, is a place called Dharampura, an old world aura of that place. And I went around looking for his father used to be the muezzin in the mosque. So I didn't know where Abdul Qadir would be staying. So all I knew was that his father was the Imam Sahib. So Imam Sahib of the Dharampura mosque. That's all I really knew. And I asked, the Panwala and this guy and that guy, and they all pointed to one direction. And I went there, and he wasn't at home. But within about 15 minutes, the word had gone around that there's this fellow who's come from India looking for him. And he turned up. And I remember he took me to his antechamber. And in the antechamber, he made me sit on a khatia. It was a jute khatia. I remember that clearly. And to save himself the embarrassment, he covered with a kapda. So I sat. And that's when I did my first interview of Abdul Qadir. For me, Abdul Qadir was a legend because he had brought leg spin bowling alive. Now, interestingly, at that moment in time in Pakistan, he wasn't a big hero because they considered him to be a stooge of Imran Khan. They said, Imran, you're Imran's man. He's stooged you into this idea. You don't belong here. So in Lahore, he used to be a hero. In Punjab, he was a hero. But whenever he went to Sindh, Abdul Qadir was the butt of all jokes. But here was I coming from India, and India for them was a big thing, And I was writing for Sportsworld. So I interviewed Abdul Qadir for maybe an hour and a half. His pals sitting around him. He had his own flunkies there. But from that moment onwards, the kind of kinship that he established with me, it turned out to be a very long series. I was there in late November, and the series continued till early February, 6 test matches. Abdul Qadir was my best friend, and I think, he considered me to be, an extension of himself. He was all over. So fascinating memories, and I think that trip was a very big character-building trip for me. That Pakistan trip is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. I keep telling my children, you guys won't know what it means to be a 19-year-old on your first bloody international trip where your office is putting down money that you can go out and report. And I was supposed to be Imran's ghostwriter. I mean, I was there partly as a cricket writer, but I was there as actually a ghostwriter. And I was supposed to be the Pakistan cricket captain's ghost. And that's how and his diktat to me was very clear. Every day, very telepathically, he told me this. End of the day, 4:30, dressing room, 5 minutes. Which means that within 5 minutes of the match ending for a particular day, you have to be outside our Pakistan dressing room. And he would leave word with Khwaja. Khwaja was the official bouncer of the Pakistan team. He generally stood out with a mustachioed guy, well-muscled Pathan, to throw people out. The moment he saw me, he would take me in. So now what happened was quite interesting, that because I was the official ghost of the Pakistan cricket captain, the Pakistani cricketers developed a sense of respect. That I was 19 years old. I mean, I was generally to be considered to be a straggler, a guy who's seeking autographs. But because Kaptan had, given a veto to Khwaja to let me in, they developed, some kind of a respect for me. And during the later part of the series, it was quite normal for Javed Miandad to come into the press box and say, spending time with me today, come. And he would, I remember this in Lahore, 5th test match. He took me home. And that's where he gave me the famous interview about why he had raised his bat to beat up Dennis Lillee. That got quoted by Benno in his book On Reflection. But, that's how I gradually wormed my way into the Pakistan cricket team. Each time when I would come back from the day's play, getting over, every single Indian and Pakistan reporter wanted to know, Kaptan ne kya bola? Because Pakistan reporters, didn't have access to their own captain. It's not like today. In those days, it was a feudal setup. Imran was the patrician. And, I don't like to use the word plebeian, but the Pakistani reporters were a collection of Urdu writers and whatever Dawn or other newspapers there were, Punjabi writers. So they never had access to Imran Khan. He was considered way beyond. I was the only clown who had access to Imran. And Imran was an incredible character. He would give me his day's synopsis almost like like a CEO would be reporting a certain dictation to an Anglo-Indian stenographer. Starting with first paragraph, he would dictate 4 sentences of the first paragraph. Then he'd actually tell me second para, and I would move on to the second paragraph. And then he would complete his second paragraph. The fascinating part was I got an interesting insight into the mind of the man. He was telling me the story, starting with the biggest thing first, then the relatively less important, then declining orders of importance, and he never he never pulled his punches. If he actually felt that, I remember this, it's coming back to me nearly 38 years later, that Abdul Qadir was trying too many things. So once I remember telling Qadir at the end of the day, Kaptan bol rahe the ki aap bahut kuch try kar rahe the. He said, Kaptan ne kaha aapko? So which means that, when he's trying out too many things was Imran's code for that, he was trying out the bloody flipper, he was trying out the googly, he was overdoing the googly, he was putting on the straight one. He should have only kept bowling a certain line and length and then just done the occasional googly. But, it's amazing that the captain of the Pakistan cricket team was actually telling me all this. So somewhere I became a repository of these stories. So Qadir would occasionally take me aside and say, what did he tell you? And I found it quite amazing that I thought he would be telling me what captain was feeling like in the Pakistan dressing room. But somehow they wanted me to tell them what I was privy to. And I found that entire experience of being in the Pakistan dressing room very educative. One, I saw them in varying states of undress, which I thought was very interesting for a 19-year-old. 19-year-old Calcuttan brought up in a very prudish environment. This was an eye-opener. But more important, all these guys, chaps I'd idolized in the 78 series. In 78, I was just a 15-year-old, 16-year-old. And there's Zahir Abbas and all these guys. But you know what? That's the kind of connect one gradually built up with them. And I went to Pakistan nearly 5 times in the 80s, 82, 83, 84, 87, I would say 86, 87, just before the World Cup. After the World Cup, I went back to make a film, so I had to look for footage. And then I went back in the famous 89 Tendulkar series. That's nearly about 5 times. But it all started with 82, 83. And I don't think there was ever a series in my mind which was as magical as that. For the sheer variety of things I saw, the sheer cadence of the language that I absorbed, the variety, it's an extension of India. And I keep saying this to people, and now, of course, nobody takes me seriously, that if you want to really, your education of India is never complete if you've not been to Pakistan. And I think it's important to understand and appreciate India sometimes through the prism of a neighboring country. And I think Pakistan played that role in 82, 83 for me.
And how was the response among other journalists? Like, as here's this 19-year-old who has direct access to Imran, and was there a sense of both, who's this upstart? Was there that sense?
Yeah.
Too?
So I'll tell you what. There were a number of reactions, and it's interesting that you asked me this. My first response was that each evening when I would meet Imran, I had a certain discipline that I would go back to my hotel room and transcribe his entire copy. I would not only transcribe his entire copy, but a certain sense of internal urgency. I would take that copy and go off to the telegraph office. In those days, we didn't have the modern accesses of communication that we have today. So the copy could only be sent against a telex card. And that telex card you took with you along with your typed copy and went to the telegraph office and you gave that copy in. What they would do is they would take that copy and punch it in. That punching was not the sending. The punching was to effectively see that, whether they had got my copy correctly, and they would make you proofread it. If you cleared that copy, then they would take that entire tape and the entire punching would come out in some kind of a code on a running tape, which would be, very thin, just be this width of your, not your thumb finger. And it would probably reels and reels of that. Finally, they would punch it in. And if they got your line in Calcutta, the bloody thing would start. And the clackety-clack would continue for another 55, 60 minutes. So I remember that there was no night on that entire series during the test matches that I went to sleep before 12:30 a.m. That was my routine. And the next morning, I would again bang out a copy. go in. Before I would enter the press box, I would give my copy in, and that copy would run for about maybe an hour or so. So I think this reputation quite developed that this fellow clogs the machines up. So because I would be the first guy to hand the copies in. And that was one. And the other one was of course, that circumstantially, at just 1981, I'd been on a pilgrimage and I'd completed the Hajj. And it was quite amazing that the Pakistani media would refer to me as Haji Saab. I'd had a name which sounded pretty difficult for them to pronounce. So generally everybody knew me as Haji Saab. And the traditional image of a Haji Saab is that of a geriatric. Yeah, there was a 19-year-old clown who would refer to as Haji Saab. So that's how, the kind of knew me in the Pakistani press box in those days.
And that was was that the tour when Imran basically said the Indian crowds were very ruly, as you wrote in that piece?
No, that was 84. He had come for some exhibition match in Bangalore. And Sportsworld said, go and get an interview of Imran. So, whenever Imran kind of put his foot on Indian soil, Sportsworld said interview. So they flew me out. And it was kind of some kind of very nominal exhibition match. And I turned up and he said, where are you going? So I said, I'm going to the ground. So he come with me. So I sat in the front near the driver and he was at the back. And that's when he used the word. He used the word, Karachi crowds are not very ruly. Gosh, I'd heard of unruly, but I'd never heard of ruly. And I kind of went back to my Oxford dictionary to check, ruly word kya hai? But, I'd heard of unruly, uncouth. But if somebody says the man was very couth, that would come as a very big surprise, But that's what our man was. I won't say he was unpredictable, but he was a refined, suave guy. He made you think. He said things that made you think. If I asked, the other thing was he never ducked. I remember 1985 Sharjah. I asked him a question on the Taliban. And that time, one of the individuals that the Taliban were inspired by. Now, everybody forgets about this today. But in 85, just remember, this is nearly 35 years ago, one of the figures that the Taliban drew the inspiration from, it was Imran Khan Niazi. Why? Very interesting. It's because he was one of the few guys to be anti-colonial. So one of the guys that they actually drew inspiration from was Imran. So once when I was interviewing him in 85 in Sharjah, I asked him about the Taliban effect. And you know what? The amazing thing is that if you ask most Indian cricketers, they either will duck or they may just give you an inarticulate reply. Imran was very comprehensive in his reply with the reference to Kashmir, reference to Taliban, reference to Pakistani government, reference to Indian government, reference to Indian political stance. He gave you a reply which was, I would say, reasonably overarching. How did I know that I have to ask him a question like this? Oh, very simple. 1983, Tavleen Singh had done an interview of Imran's in Sunday magazine, where she had actually positioned the article as, or rather the interview as, all the questions that you wanted to ask Imran Khan but never could. So it wasn't a cricket interview. So I think that was the first time I understood that there was a non-cricketing dimension to him as well. So by 85, when I had known him reasonably well, I asked him non-cricket questions as well. And Imran was very willing to answer. Never ducked. He never smarted. He thought it was just a normal thing. He's asked me a question on politics and I've actually given this guy a reply. He enhanced our confidence to be able to ask him those questions. Don't forget, I was just 22 years old at that time. But I had the confidence to ask him, this man will answer. And he generally answered. Only once I remember that he kind of took offense. 1987, we were walking up the stairs at Taj Palace Hotel in Delhi. And I told him that I felt that the Pakistani team was excessively appealing. We were walking together and suddenly I realized that he wasn't with me because he had heard what I had said. He just stood rooted to his ground at a stair level, which is about a couple of stairs, or maybe 3 or 4 levels lower. And he says, you can't be serious. He actually took offense at my saying that the Pakistan team was over-appealing. But that's the kind of man he was. He generally never refused to answer any question. He never said it's off the record. Never. The off the record words was something that he never ever employed in any interview of his.
And we've spoken about, you writing a column for him and the person he was, but you also saw some phenomenal spells of his and performances. I mean, Karachi 82 must have been
Karachi
something.
82 is, Karachi 82 is really, when you take that as an index, then at the end of the day, there's nothing else to do. Maybe he's done some great work against West Indies, in the late 80s. And people did tell me that, it was a legendary spell. But if you ask me, legendary spell by any bowler, I'd still say it was Imran. And it's not because other bowlers may have bowled better. Sometimes, it's a little difficult to say who bowled better because he's sitting 70 yards away. But if you look at the overall impact, the holistic impact of what one spell did, one, of course, is that, he broke the back of the Indian batting. Number two, it happened in the second test match at Karachi. So effectively, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first test at Lahore was washed out. So this was an important match. Third, I think it wasn't the fact that he picked up wickets for next to nothing. It's how he picked up those wickets. Vishwanath shouldering arms to Imran and getting bowled by a delivery that came in. I think that was something. It was, there was, when I remember this Jake LaMotta and Sugar Ray Robinson, early 50s, they fought on the 14th of February and they call it the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. That Christmas Day, the Christmas Day Massacre in 1982, Pakistan versus India at Karachi.
Yeah, and I think the Sportsworld headline was also that something about Christmas, right?
Yeah, it was Christmas Day, 25th of December. See, you have a test match starting on the 26th of December only in Melbourne. Pakistan couldn't care less. So 25th is actually a chutti ka din. It was a chutti ka din. So, everybody had come in, and I remember my host in Karachi had wrangled a ticket that you must take me to the match on Christmas Day. And I had taken him, and he was very happy.
And there was one thing more about Imran that I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, until we move on to other things. 1987 World Cup semi-final in Lahore. You were fortunate enough to be there in that famous upset when Australia beat Pakistan. But I found that archive of your column, and I found a fascinating insight that said that at the end of that match, in the dressing room, Imran was wearing a T-shirt that had a tiger on it. Now, when you talk about absolutely. Imran and tiger, everyone talks about 92, but 87 also he had a tiger.
No. Very clearly he had a tiger. Very clearly. Very clearly. I remember Shahid Sheikh, that's the name of the cricket writer from Jung. He had broken down. I mean, I can understand journalists being a little downcast. You feel, because your ticket to Calcutta would have been taken into account because the finals were in Calcutta. But I could not believe that a cricket writer of a prominent newspaper breaking down and bawling like a child. I saw it, yeah. So, this brought home the fact that in some of the smaller countries, and I've seen that kind of reaction in Sri Lanka, I've seen that in Pakistan. The smaller the country, and even seen it in Bangladesh, the smaller the country, the more intense the feeling. Even among journalists. I mean, journalists are supposed to be dispassionate. Journalists are not supposed to take sides. If India does badly, you will say India did badly. But no, not in Pakistan, boss. And for that match, they thought that it was divinely ordained and written that Pakistan was going to Calcutta for the finals. And here this guy comes, Steve Waugh, he upsets everybody's plan. And half the journalists in the Pakistan media, the press box, were downcast. And I remember Shahid Sheikh breaking down, bawling like a child. I mean, he actually had to take handkerchief out and wipe his tears and all that. I thought it was quite amazing.
And I think there was a general sense of shock that day, right? Like everyone thought that, and Imran also says, everyone came up to me and said, what happened? As if I had an explanation.
So the PG Wodehouse, if you read, it describes it very well. You could cut the gloom out of the air with a spoon. Yeah. I would say that you could cut the gloom out of the air in the Lahore evening with a fork. It was that bad. And it was ordained. If somebody had told me that it was written in the holy book that Pakistan is going to play in the finals in Calcutta, I would say, yeah, I believe it. Because that's how the mood was. Yeah? But after that, they felt that a great what should a great betrayal had taken place. The destiny had conspired against them. This couldn't be true. And they were only soothed by the fact that India got beaten in the semi-finals a couple of days later.
And you ended that report, again, I was fortunate to get the archive. You ended that report with the line that said the party was over and Imran Khan had passed into the history books. So it seems that there was a feeling that this was the end of Imran.
Yes, of course. I think he had virtually announced that this was his last, this was not going to play after this. So it was over. The game, the last full stop had been written in his cricket career. Of course, I mean, little did we know as to how history would be rewritten. But at that time, it was over. So there was it was the tragedy in two senses, more than one. One, of course, that Pakistan had lost. But the other was that a great cricketer had played the last of his matches. He played the last of his career. And that one great chapter was now coming to an end.
So in a sense, having seen that and having seen the depth of emotion in Lahore, to then come back to Calcutta for the World Cup final, did it feel a bit anticlimactic?
I'll tell you what was very upsetting for all of us. The way we folded in the semi-finals. See, we were in transit. So from Lahore to Delhi, we were waiting in Delhi and we landed in Delhi, understanding the scores. It was live television was on, definitely. So, we were keeping on tracking the score. And the fact that we had also convinced ourselves that we were going to Calcutta. And that's where the great final was. And this would now be Australia versus India. Suddenly the script changed. It became Australia versus England. So it was, and it's a line, that they use often in Urdu, that Begane ki shaadi mein Abdullah Diwana. So it was exactly that we were all dressed up. And really we had nowhere to go. 80,000 people turned up, and it wasn't their constituency playing, it was somebody else. And here they turned up because they bought tickets. And even I think that those days we were very naive. The aura of the cricket ground, the Eden Gardens, the World Cup, even if your team wasn't playing and you had no emotional stake in the game, you still went.
And as somebody who had grown up in Calcutta, did that match mean a lot to you?
No, surprisingly it didn't. And I remember a day before the match, David Frith was there, and we were all playing cricket and at the Dalhousie Institute. And it didn't mean a lot because it wasn't our match. I mean, we were going to ride on somebody else, and England, Australia. So one went through the motions, and one wrote about the crowd, and one wrote about this, and one wrote about that. But really, we were underinvested in that match. We weren't really emotionally, we didn't have a skin in that game. So we just wrote about it just like any media people would. And we went into the press box to see, whether John Woodcock was. I was more concerned about whether Robin Marler was there, Tim Rice. So I'll tell you another thing. This is very interesting. That while I was on that circuit, I was given the Pakistan circuit. And I remember England playing Pakistan at Gujranwala, if I'm not mistaken. No.
Yes.
Faisalabad. Faisalabad, yeah. Not Gujranwala. Gujranwala was England versus, it was West Indies versus England, if I'm not mistaken.
Gujranwala is where Alan Lamb basically went nuts.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I remember that excellent run out by Hooper. Not Hooper, Harper. But that apart, it's in Faisalabad that I actually saw Tim Rice in the press box. And Tim Rice would travel with the England team. And in those days, my perception of Tim Rice wasn't that precise. It was, but Tim Rice was a very, very big cricket freak. He was, I would say he was a groupie in a slightly more exalted sense. And I happened to see him in Faisalabad. And I remember him because he had white shoes. He was a tall guy. He wore white trousers and he had white shoes. I said, wow. And then realized by his, he had a distinctive hairstyle. I said, oh, Tim Rice. So I didn't know much about him. It wasn't Google. You couldn't just Google Tim Rice and get to know. You either were evolved to know who Tim Rice was, or you never knew who Tim Rice was. It was the pre-Google days. But I remember Tim Rice in the press box.
So, okay, there are two ways I can take this now, but I'll take it in one way. Now that you've mentioned Tim Rice, talk a bit about, your early influences of reading about cricket or reading about, or just reading. Who were the writers who, made that impression on you, and how did you develop this interest of cricket writing?
Say, partly, I wouldn't start with cricket writing, so I'm going to start with cricket as a subject. And I must tell you this, that we grew up on that 50 paise sports weeks of the early 70s. And the pictures of sports weeks, the articles that people were all indelibly etched in the mind. Why I mention sports week is that it became an issue in the family. I used to get pocket money for 2 rupees a month. And sports week was a weekly. And I would select to spend 2 rupees a month, my entire savings or whatever I used to get, on buying this magazine. And then what would I do with the magazine? I would cut the magazines up because I used to have scrapbooks. My mother took great objection. And she said, if this is what is going to happen to the magazine, then you might as well save your 2 rupees and do something better with it. My dad said, no, this boy is being entrepreneurial. He's buying, he can easily have. Mom said you should spend it on ice creams. Dad said, no, if this is what he's wanting to spend it in, trust his judgment. So I used to buy my sports weeks and then I would clip the sports weeks up, create scrapbooks and stuff. And while I used to buy those sports weeks, I would occasionally read them as well. So that's how the culture of reading began. And I wouldn't read anything else. I would just read the sports weeks. Monday at 4 o'clock is when the sports weeks would arrive at the Panwala. Not a Panwala, he was the magazine vendor. And I kept that practice up for quite some time. Nearly 10 to 12 years, I would go and buy from him. And what happened concurrently was something very interesting. I grew up in the community, the Dawoodi Bohra community in Calcutta, where after God, Allah, Prophet, and the Quran, the next religion was actually cricket. The Bohras took cricket very, very seriously, to the point that they made most of the character assumptions not on the basis of whether a person was good in business, or he had shown great integrity in business, or his sense of governance was very high, or he treated his wife very courteously, but whether he could bat well, whether he wore his cricket clothes with a certain sense of etiquette, whether his cricket socks were actually stockings and not socks. They actually judge people's character on the basis of how they were turned out on the cricket field. Now it all sounds like fiction, but I can tell you in the early 70s, this is exactly how seriously the Bohras took their cricket. And I grew up in that environment. If a team was to be selected for a Shield match, there used to be meetings on a Saturday evening amongst people who were 45 and 50-year-olds to decide match strategy. It was that serious. And in the lunch break on a Sunday, during a Shield match, the general menu reserved for players was always chicken sandwich. Not chicken sandwich, chicken soup. Not sandwich, not food, but chicken soup. Reason is because they felt chicken soup was a good digestive. You could digest it fast and it would give you an energy kick. So it didn't matter whether you had fielded in the morning or you had batted in the morning, but lunch was always chicken soup for the boss. And that's the mahal in which we grew up. The kids were assigned responsibilities of scoring. They made character assumptions on children based on whether the children could fill the score sheet out properly, whether they could fill the score sheet out without scratching, without making, overruling, overwriting. It's on these assumptions were based the opinions of whether we were going to become good citizens in life or not. So cricket was like, says C.L.R. James may have seen in Trinidad. I can tell you that in a lot of ways, our Bohras in Calcutta were exactly the same. You'd be amazed to know that whenever we had a Shield matches, the crowd, our population, Bohra population in Calcutta in those days used to be 7,000 people. In a Shield match, 1,500 people would turn up. And I would say out of the 1,500 people, about 800 to 900 would be women. I have never seen such a social intermingling and a social ferment at not a test match level, but a local level. It was like a village cricket match. And the entire Maidan used to be full of Bohras. And the Bohras virtually ran the trade. They would bring the alus and, they would vend sweets and they would vend things to eat. It became a village environment there, while their 22 players fought out in the middle. So I think these things were very formative. So when I expressed a desire that I wanted to become a cricket writer, The parents didn't say, you need to do an MBA. They thought it was a very honorable thing to do. Today, if my son were to say that I'm going to write cricket, we'll say, shucks, he should be going to Wharton and Cornell. But not so in those days. When I told my parents that I want to be a professional cricket writer, they actually thought it was a very honorable thing to do. So they went around telling other people, he's going to write on cricket. He's going to write on cricket. So you know what happened? When I joined Sportsworld, I also told them that I am not going to be a sports writer. I am a cricket writer. It was almost like I'm a Brahmin. So don't classify me. Don't classify me with the rest. It was almost like I made this condition obligatory on them that only if you accept me as a cricket writer will I, join Sportsworld. So very interestingly, now I look back on that this entire sequence with a lot of, I would say, surprise and awe. But whenever they assigned me to write on a hockey match or a football match, which they occasionally did, I refused to take a byline. I would say that my byline is, I'm not going to besmirch my byline with a football column. I'm a cricket writer. So effectively what happened was that the football or cricket or a hockey column would often be carried by a special correspondent, even though I would have gone and reported, but I'd never take a byline. The byline would only be reserved for cricket. So what happened was that in the entire Anand Bazaar, if they needed a clarification on cricket, they'd say, you remember the guy in Sportsworld, just go and ask him. That's the brand I developed, and I was only 19 years old.
How did you get what went into you to make such demands so early in life and your career?
I really don't know. I don't think I had a great... See, this branding stuff only dawned on me much later. But I knew one thing, that I'd get taken less seriously as a cricket writer and be consigned off as a generalist. I wasn't a generalist. I wanted to be a specialist. So I'll tell you, I remember this instance very, very vividly in my mind. 1982-83, Keith Fletcher's team had come down to India, MCC versus India. In those days, they used to still be carrying the MCC tag. And it so happened that the president of the MCC was also in Calcutta, and that it was a gentleman called Hubert Doggett. And Ashish Ray happened to know Hubert Doggett from his London days. So Ashish needed a flunky to go along with him to meet Hubert Doggett. So Ashish told me that, will you come? I said, wow, I'm going to meet Hubert Doggett because I'd read something on him. So I went to the Grand Hotel. And in the midst of that conversation, Hubert Doggett mentioned two instances. He mentioned a poem called "Oh My Hornby and My Barlow Long Ago." And this poem was from the 1880s. Hubert Doggett just remembered that one line. I recited the next 8 lines for him. And he almost fell off his sofa because he turned to Ashish and he couldn't believe that this 19-year-old in Calcutta has actually recited virtually the entire "Oh My Hornby and My Barlow Long Ago," that entire poem. And that was one recitation. And he mentioned something in passing about Warwick Armstrong's playing a team led by A.C. McLaren in 1921. And McLaren said, I'll pick my 11 and I'll beat Warwick Armstrong, because Warwick Armstrong had won the entire series in England and they had not lost a match. McLaren's 11 beat Warwick Armstrong. And I told him exactly how much Faulkner had made in that match, and I told him exactly the scores. And you know what? Ashish came back and told Tiger that this guy has surprised the hell out of Hubert Doggett. So a couple of days later, Tiger walks into the Sportsworld cubicle. We used to have not a very large room, and Tiger being Tiger, Tiger spoke in monosyllables, and he never spoke full sentences. Tiger said, "We're going to Kanpur." Now, you had to basically decode the Morse. And the Morse was that you are going to be reporting the test match on behalf of Sportsworld in Kanpur in early February. That was the full sentence. Tiger never spoke that full sentence. He only said, "You go to Kanpur. You have to figure it out." So I figured it out. But it partly happened because of what happened with Hubert Doggett in the front of, in the presence of Ashish. And Ashish very graciously came back and told Avik Sarkar and Tiger Pataudi, this is a 19-year-old madman. He went and did this with Hubert Doggett.
So that is what I was trying to ask you in the earlier question. Like, obviously, not Sports Week couldn't have been your only source of cricket. I mean, to be able to recite the poem and to be able to tell Faulkner's score, you must have been also steeped in cricket writing of some other type, right?
So you know what? And I must mention the name of my neighbor. The neighbor is Bilkis. Bilkis used to stay on the second floor. And Bilkis had uh, an access to a very valuable property. And the property was she had a library card for British Council. And whenever she was not using the British Council library card, she very graciously lent me those cards. And I remember in the space of about 18 months, I cleared out virtually the entire British Council cricket section. There was hardly a classic on cricket that I had probably not read. So if you ask me, CLR James Beyond the Boundary, actually much of it was lost on me at that time. But I think I had completed that. It was like, a child reciting the Quran. When we are young, by the age of 7 or 8, we are enjoined to complete the first full recitation of the Quran. And when I was 15, I had completed my first full recitation of CLR James's Beyond the Boundary. So, and in addition to that, a few Cardis books and a few this books. So virtually everything that I needed to know, I had not just read, I had actually made notes out of it. If I came across something that I found very interesting in that book, I actually copied it in my notebook and I tore that notebook out and documented it by saying Trevor Goddard / Walter Hammond / 1932. And I took that and I copied it twice over and put that under Goddard's envelope, which I still have in my collection, and put another of that same note under Walter Hammond. So effectively what happened in 24 months or 36 months, that Walter Hammond envelope had then become a fat envelope because all the classics that I had read, wherever Walter Hammond anecdote occurred, I didn't have access to, scanning it on my phone or transferring it electronically. So I would have to copy it. So I would copy everything and put them under respective envelopes. So the other day I was cleaning my entire collection and I came across those envelopes and I said, let me see which number did I end at. I used to number each of the envelopes. I think 257 is what my last envelope was numbered. So I had probably 257 cricketers completely archived and logged as per my system, my Google, when I was, 15, 16 years old in the late 70s.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, okay.
That I'm just thinking, at 19 years old, you were not only one of the best cricket writers in India, you could possibly have been India's foremost cricket historian going by what you've done.
Well, I didn't think too much about it, but I do know that when I joined Anand Bazaar in 1981, I was not even 19 years old. So they had a problem and I wasn't even a graduate. So they said that we will give you we will put you on a voucher system. What's a voucher system? Voucher system means you can go up on the salary day, you can go up to the cashier, present your voucher and get cash. But you can't get PF and you can't get gratuity and you're not an official employee on the books. So I said, when do I become an employee? So they said, you can only become an employee when you present your college degree. So I said, shucks, boss, my college degree is about 3 years away now. Yeah. So it's very ironical that I went to Pakistan and was Imran Khan's ghostwriter when I used to only be drawing a cash voucher salary of 850 rupees. When you are an 850 rupees salary employee, you don't get increments. So my remuneration was virtually frozen for 3 years until I got my college degree. And the day I went and presented my college degree, within 3 days, they gave me an official letter saying, the Anand Bazaar Publications is pleased to announce to accept you as a, sub-editor in the grade of so-and-so, with a salary this of this. Finally, I got that on an official level. Otherwise, I was just a cash voucher salaried, not even an employee, cash voucher salaried hand. And I acted as Imran Khan's ghost writer, as an official cricket writer, while nobody knew the real story that I was only 850 rupee cash vouchered chap who works out of Anand. Nobody knew the real story. And I had to actually go to my college and say that, I'm getting this big break. Can you let me off for 3 months? The amazing thing is that I bless the memory of Father Maliakal at St. Xavier's. He actually said yes. Most people would have said, how will you make up your attendance? He says, go. We'll see what will have to happen later. I don't think even he realized the import of what I was doing. But I'm really grateful that people like him who took such extremely, I would say, lateral calls, maverick calls, they made a cricket career possible.
So the fact that you spoke about Tiger and telling him, saying that you're going to Kanpur, tell us also a bit about the leadership at that time, because given it was the early 80s and people were obviously then a lot of journalism was based on hierarchy. To trust a 19-year-old for such an important assignment. Tell us about both Tiger as well as your editor at Sportsworld, as well as the general atmosphere at that time at Sportsworld, which had a young setup.
So I never asked Tiger why he did this, but I do know that Ajay Kumar, who used to be the before I joined, used to be virtually managing Sportsworld. He would often tell me that the day I would write a letter to, I would write these letters to the editor pointing mistakes out, and they would shit bricks. They would say, "Oh my God!" And the day I would land up and try and meet them, they would panic. And this is what Ajay has told me, because they felt, "Oh shucks, this guy must have found another blooper in the magazine." So so that's the reputation that I built up. And you know what? I think by just focusing on cricket, by focusing on history, because that's the only thing I knew very well, somewhere I developed a reputation that this guy knows his cricket inside out. So they felt that, yeah, how bad can it be? I used to. So when I went to Kanpur, I was again ghostwriting, doing a little reportage for Sportsworld. Little. What I actually ended up doing was that Ahmedabad had a tabloid called Hindustan Standard. And I was damn kicked to be doing the daily reporting for Hindustan Standard. I felt, I was also a journalist. I was a daily writer. I was a cricket writer, I felt. Even though I could have been a cricket writer also for Sportsworld. But writing for a daily, even though it was a tabloid, and they paid me 50 rupees per article that appeared. But you know what? All these little, small strands of, intervention was built the edifice of my little career. And these people, Shaudin Banerjee, old gentlemen of Hindustan Standard, Arijit Sen, Ajay Kumar definitely, then Tiger himself, all these guys didn't say that we are encouraging you, but, gave me breaks. And, they treated a focused and dedicated cricket writer with a lot of, I would say, a lot of room, gave him a lot of latitude, and they humored me in a very non-condescending way. And I think I was 18 years old and 19 years old. Today, I don't see anybody getting that kind of break in any major organization. It's a credit to Anand Bazar that they even had somebody paying him 850 rupees on a salary, on a voucher. Today, it's unthinkable here. I used to do morning college, 6 o'clock to 9:40, 10:15 I used to be in Sportsworld. I would skip breakfast. I would be in Ahmedabad. I would go home at about 12:45, 1 o'clock, and finally have my first meal of the day. And then, because my house was pretty close by. But I don't see such decisions being taken anymore, largely because of the great respect for hierarchy. And yes, in a certain sense, the press box hierarchy was not very comfortable, because you had some very worthy names, you had very senior names. And I'm not sure whether they were completely delighted to see a 19-year-old in the press box who could rattle off any bloody statistic. Somewhere I consider myself to be an equal. Maybe that was also an exaggeration. Maybe the result of mental exaggeration. But the fact is that it did create occasional problems in the press box, and then necessarily take very kindly. But that, being early 80s, I presume it happened.
Do you think Tiger, who was forced into Captain India at 21, maybe that sort of whole aspect of him said that, okay, age doesn't matter, anyone can do the job?
So I'll give you two instances here. And I believe that what you're saying may just be true. He probably knew who to back and when to back. Tiger never ever told you that he wrote well. He just didn't do it. It was not him. But he would do it in very different ways. And I remember in 84, I must have quoted Allama Iqbal when I was on the Pakistan tour in 84. And Tiger never told me that he read me very keenly or he liked, but he only said this, and he wrote me a handwritten note. No, he sent me a telex that the next time you quote Iqbal, try and get Khushwant to translate. That's all he wrote. But somewhere if you knew Tiger, it was his way of also praising you and also telling you that maybe you might have screwed up in getting the right translation for Iqbal, because I do recognize that Shikwa and Jawab-e-Shikwa were translated by Khushwant, and Allama Iqbal had written that. The other thing that I must say, and I don't think this interview would be complete, is that the other individual who was a very big help and backed me as a 19 years old was certain Sunil Manohar Gavaskar. Now, it's a very interesting thing for me to say this, because the Anand Bazar in those days didn't get along well with Gavaskar. And the general diktat given to all their cricket writers was, you must find something wrong with Gavaskar. But I remember that 82-83 trip. And I remember in the Pakistan trip, I was just 19 years old. And each time I went to ask Gavaskar, who was our captain, for either a quote or an interview or a clarification, he would go out of his way to make you feel very comfortable. I remember asking him for an interview on 2 different occasions of the series. And I remember when the entire series was over and we had lost. It was a bad series to have lost. Gavaskar gave me a very patient interview. And one of the things that I came home with was certain respect and admiration for the man, because he'd always gone out of his way to be accommodating. And this is one picture I have of Gavaskar. If you were young, if you were hardworking, and you were conscientious, Gavaskar always went out of his way to support. It's taken me a long time to say this. I think I did tell him this when he had retired, that, things were not the best between the two of us, because of a couple of articles that I wrote thereafter. But I did write in one of my pieces that a lot of people accused him of betting on matches. And I wrote why I didn't think that was right. It was very unfair for the world to have said that. But I'm saying this today that the man is a very interesting man, and he went out of his way to support a young journalist who was just 19 years old in 1982.
So tell us about Kanpur, which you went. I mean, the first test is something that nobody forgets when they cover it. Tell us what you remember from it.
Kanpur was, if I'm not mistaken, just after the Chennai test match. In the Chennai test match of 1982, a certain gentleman called Mr. Gundappa Vishwanath had hit 222. And I remember Frank Keating writing that some of his square drives could have been hung by any art gallery. What a line to have read. So when I walked out on the Green Park, I remember it was one day before the test match, and they were just practicing at nets. And you know what? I saw Vishwanath batting at nets. He wasn't batting in nets as in proper nets. Somebody was throwing, he got somebody to throw the ball from a half pitch. And he was just rolling his wrists. I've not forgotten that here. This was incredible, what I saw. And of course, there were other memories. There was a memory of Mike Braley in the press box. There's a memory of Richard Streeton. I remember Richard Streeton because he had just won a Times award for writing a book on Percy Fender. These are the heroes I had grown up on. Percy Fender. I said, oh my God, it's Richard Streeton. So I actually went and took Richard Streeton's autograph. The press box had perhaps more stars for me than the actual bloody ground had here. But, this was a 19-year-old. I remember having the lunch. I thought that the lunch that they served in Green Park, was perhaps the most incredible lunch served in any cricket ground. I saw Lala Amarnath, and Lala Amarnath was very kind to have posed for a photograph. I could never get over the fact that Lala Amarnath's entire hair was completely jet black. And right to the later part of his years, 87, 88, 89, I could always remark, oh my God, he must be spending half an hour dyeing it or 2 hours dyeing his hair. But that's how these are the characters who made up cricket. So I must mention one more memory on which I grew up. And this memory is that of, when I mentioned Vishwanath rolling his wrists, the other indelible memory is that of Mushtaq Ali. Mushtaq Ali had come down to Calcutta in 1978. And because I would keep writing letters to him in Indore, he had my address and he connected with me. We were thrilled here. So our neighborhood cricket team said, we must invite Mushtaq Ali to tutor us on batting. Now, this might sound very bizarre today, but we actually told him. And he said, yes. So we went to St. Xavier's, because I used to study in St. Xavier's, and went and told the St. Xavier's dean that we want a pitch to be reserved. The great Mushtaq Ali has come down and we want him to tutor us at the nets. So they said yes. So I remember it was a side wicket. And we were batting, some of our boys were batting and some of our boys were bowling, and Mushtaq Ali would tell us, your leg should be this way, your arm is not coming over your right shoulder is this, and all the technical stuff he would keep telling us. Later part of the afternoon, we got a bright idea. And we said, sir, why don't you also bat? So he said, okay. So we gave him gloves. In those days, we didn't have those abdominal guards which had those straps and all. So he said, no, I don't want that. So he, with only a pair of batting gloves and a bat, he went in. Nothing else, no leg guards. And we were devilish guys here. We put our best fast bowler to bowl at him. First couple of balls, he bounced it up. And I think Mushtaq Ali must have just middled in. And remember, this is a 67-year-old man batting and facing a 17-year-old, 18-year-old tear-away fast bowler. I think it was the fourth ball. Ball must have pitched on the off stump or a little outside the off stump. And normally, what would we have done? We would have tried to hit it past cover. Mushtaq Ali didn't do that. He saw the ball early. He, reverse swept. And he didn't just reverse sweep the way they're doing today. He reverse swept, and he reverse swept not on the ground. He reverse swept a 6. This is 1978. He rolled his wrists the other way, and the ball flew right from the pitch and went straight and hit the library. They have that skylight. It was made of glass. It bloody went right through the skylight, shattered the glass, and we never went up to the library to ask for the ball back again. But if you wanted me to see what genius was, I don't think I saw genius thereafter on a cricket ground the way I saw it on that afternoon. When Mushtaq Ali just reversed the guy, picked him up full length and hit him for a 6 over third man, and the ball went right through the skylight of the Xavier's library. It was incredible. I'd never seen anything like it.
Wow. I mean, this should be in folklore. This 6 should be known more.
This is like the Trumper broken window story, right?
The Trumper. So you know what? We didn't have the vision. I should have gone up to Xavier's and told them that I'm going to replace your entire skylight, not just the glass, but the skylight. I'll get you a new skylight along with the wooden compartments. But I want this to be taken out, and if you can give it to me. It was stupid. we kind of sulked and we ran away. We shied away for the fear that maybe we would be called up by the dean and asked to, that you need to pay for this. We would not only have been willing to pay for the shattered skylight, would have been willing to pay for the entire skylight. But we were fools. Short-sighted.
I mean, all the gully cricketers in India at that time, you must have been the one person who should have known the importance of that broken window.
Yeah, so, that was, and it was a bad, later years, one sort of became more aware of memorabilia, that I realized that what people consider waste is actually great wealth. So I'll give you another memory which stands out in my mind, and this one deals with Pataudi. I think this must have been the year 1986 or 87. And this would be 12 years after Pataudi is retired. So I would have placed him he must have been mid-40s. What would be standard was that our Sportsworld team whenever Tiger came to Calcutta, the Sportsworld team would go for a lunch with him. That particular afternoon, we had gone to the Dalhousie Institute. And I think the boys said, let's play cricket. So we guys played cricket. Tiger never played. He would always he would do two things. Either he would sit on the edge with his beer, or he would be umpire. He was always a willing umpire. That day, for some reason, he nursed his beer and he was sitting on the sidelines. I don't know, somebody must have provoked him, said, Tiger, you've been sitting for too long. Why didn't you come and field? He came. And I remember him standing somewhere near wideish mid-wicket. And you know what? We didn't have stumps. So what we did was, in those days, you had that collapsible metal chair, which, often used to be used by the peons in the office. So Dalhousie Institute had that. We bought that from somewhere and made that the wicket. And one of us hit the ball near mid-wicket. And remember, Tiger standing wideish mid-wicket. And Lee, I remember very clearly, he was wearing a T-shirt. 2 buttons were open. And he was wearing brown corduroy trousers, jeans, and Kolhapuri chappals. That's Tiger. And somebody hit a ball to mid-wicket. He must have walked over from wideish mid-wicket to mid-wicket. And then what I saw, I will not forget ever. He bent down. Normally, most of us would have bent down, got up, thrown the ball to the wicketkeeper. The wicketkeeper would have tried to run the batsman out. For Tiger, all this is a waste of time. What he did was, he didn't run. Tiger would never run. It was beyond his shan or shaukat that he would run to get the ball. So he just ambled across to the ball, bent, and while he is bent, he just flicked the ball. So he flicked the ball off his ankles. And he flicked the ball off his ankles, and the ball, it was tennis ball, it went and hit the metal chair. And the metal chair ricocheted off, it sort of shook with the impact. And I remember the metal chair was thrown off. And this is a man just throwing the ball from near his ankles, and with just one flick of his wrist, and he hit the stump straight. I'd never seen him field in the covers. But that day, all of us, and I remember all those guys of Sportsworld are still around, and they still remember, they said, oh, that Tiger incident, when we talk about it, this is the apex of our memory. That man from his ankles, he just flicked the tennis ball and it shattered the chair.
How was he as an editor? Did he edit at all? Was he just there?
No, I think he was just there. But I'll tell you what he actually did. He wrote his own edits. And he wrote his own edits. He crafted them well. But apart from that, it was largely, he was hands-off. But I remember one occasion when he wasn't hands-off. And I remember there was this guy who had spied against India called Larkins. I don't remember his first name, but Captain Larkins. And I don't remember, it wasn't Wayne definitely, because Wayne Larkins was a cricketer. But Larkins was somebody who had spied against India, and he was in Tihar. And somewhere I had read that Larkins was using cricket as a medium of bringing prisoners together. So once I casually mentioned to Tiger that, I think I want to take you guys to meet Larkins in jail, and maybe even if he could do something and go and play with him. He said, yeah, the idea doesn't sound bad. Let's do it. So I spoke to Gavaskar and I spoke to Mohinder Ramanath as well. And all three of us, Jimmy, Gavaskar, Marshanil, Tiger, we went off to Tihar jail. And Larkins met us and we played cricket. And I took photographs and this and that, and Larkins showed them around and they had a good time. And I remember in the jail, they also happened to meet a gentleman called Rajendra Sethia. Sethia was in jail in those days. Sethia was at one time one of the richest men in the world until his business collapsed. Now, when we came out, I think a couple of days thereafter, I was going to write a piece. Tiger said, we won't carry the story. I said, Tiger, we must, it's a good break. And Tiger said, no, we're not carrying a photograph and we're not carrying a story. So finally, he was the editor. He took his call. But I remember that 3 years later, one day, bad discretion on my part, I used the photograph of Gavaskar in jail in Tihar with Larkins. And I thought it was a non-issue. But you know what? He got back. He just sent me a very, very soft message he sent. He only told me, I thought we had an agreement. That's all he said. Nothing more. So in a lot of ways, I found him to be extremely witty. He had a great eye for wit. So he could, I think you got along well with him if you played a practical joke on him. That also sent a message out to him that you treated him like an equal. If you gave him standard suggestions, you would bore him. So one day I remember that I was sent to collect Tiger from the station, Howrah station. And he never came by. He never flew to Calcutta. He always came by train, Rajdhani. And my responsibility to go and collect Tiger. So I went. And it so happened that the car that we were taking to come back got stuck in a jam on Howrah Bridge. So we were sitting. He looked on the river. I told him, there's another way to get across the river, and that's a ferry. He says, you must be joking. I said, no, I'm telling you. He said, why don't we take it? So I said, yeah, we can. But it'll also mean that we'll have to walk or get out of this car and send him off with the saman, his luggage or whatever. We'll send him to the Anand Bazar office. We will get down, walk back, which means we'll get off the bridge, go to the ferry counter, stand in queue, buy the ticket, go into the ferry. You will have about 450 people for company. Then don't tell me that, this guy is asking me for an autograph and that guy didn't intrude in my privacy. Yeah, no problem. So we actually got off and we stood in that ferry queue and we went into the ferry. The ferry must have had its usual 450 people. People were damn surprised. And he had come down for a quiz contest in Calcutta. So, the typical Bengali, and I remember somebody asking, Pat Keno Esche. Bengalis have a very amusing way of saying, they would never say tiger. They would say Pat. Pat Keno Esche. So I told him that he's come for the quiz contest here. And they very respectfully tell him, we remember you hitting six, Van holder, straight shot. So, all the very amusing, jolly company happened. And then finally we got off on the other side of the river. Now there was no car because car we had already sent off. So we hailed a Sardarji in a taxi and we reached the Grand Hotel. But that's how he was. He didn't take himself very seriously. And he kept himself, in a room, if he sat with you or sat with a number of people, his voice would be among the last you would hear. But yet, in a lot of ways, people gravitated towards him because of his sheer aura. If he entered a room, you knew that he was like Imran. There was a presence value. So, he carried his presence value very well. He knew that people coveted his presence value, but he never pushed his opinion, never pushed his presence on anyone. To that extent, I quite respect his memory.
Wonderful. Yeah. So, you were lucky to have direct contact to two sets of royalty, one Imran and one Pat. What doesn't get better than that?
Yeah. And he was very casual. Otherwise, most people get very either standoffish or they probably feel awkward. He wasn't. He was absolutely enjoying himself. And, these are little vignettes one picked up of him. So even when he went to the Grand Hotel, the way he would pick up a conversation with the person who came to make up his room, he would ask him his name. Now, most people would never bother about the name of the man who's coming up to make up your bed. And he would ask him, kitne saal baki hain aapke retirement? All these things I've heard. So I'm not making it up. So the person would say, Nawab Sahab, abhi bhi 8 saal baki hain. So then he would say, 8 saal aapke pure ho jaye, to bataiyega kabhi. So, this is how graciously the conversation would build up. And there's some things about him which were quite remarkable. And I thought he was in a number of ways, he was a very gentle soul at one level. And he was also in his own way a very interesting character. For example, he would lie in his house beside the phone and keep listening to Begum Akhtar. The other thing I remember, his talaffuz. When you speak Urdu, we are very particular about the cadence, nuances of language. The K is never the same as a Q wala K. It's always different. And I remember one word the Tiger would always use, Qutub Minar. Most people would say Qutub Minar. Tiger never said Qutub Minar. He always said Qutub. If you understand the K for Qutub, in Tiger's language always came from the back of his throat. It never came from the front of his tongue. If it's the front of the tongue, you'll know that the guy doesn't understand his Urdu. But to that extent, in those little vignettes, you actually caught the glimpse of a man who'd been brought up with a lot of refinement and a lot of taste. He would always tell you, Qutub Minar. In that little vignette would pick up, ki yaar, aadmi mein kitni grace aur kitna depth. You could pick that up.
Wonderful. So, now that we have touched a bit about Calcutta and lovely conversations around cricket, you have to tell us about the general feeling around cricket in the 70s and 80s in Calcutta, because then there wasn't any major cricketer from who was playing for India then. And how was it? And how was it compared to football? And also, how good really was Karthik Bose?
So that's a very, very, very surprising question you should ask me, because I remember going in 1975 to a match where Karthik Bose was playing, and Karthik Bose must have been in his 70s, late 60s, 70s at that time. So I have two memories of Karthik Bose. I used to go to Eden Gardens to copy pages from the Wisden. Eden Gardens has a cricket library, the Cricket Association of Bengal, and they have every single Wisden, I think from 1881 onwards. So because they have this fascinating collection, in those days I would go, after my school would be over in the afternoon, I would go to the Eden Gardens and copy pages. So 1896, 1897 Wisden, Ranji Cricketer of the Year, because 1896 he made his debut. Every word written on Ranji's Cricketer of the Year, I would have copied. Now, coincidentally, the one man who would always turn up in the late afternoon at Eden Gardens used to be Karthik Bose. So I would go and meet him, and as I would say that, I'm a researcher, I sit in the library, and some of the people there would refer me to Karthik Dava, saying that, he comes every day. This boy is a very laborious and very studious character. So one day I asked him about Muhammad Nisar. And I was fascinated because all these guys of 1932, 36 were like hallowed names. He told me once Nisar, he said I couldn't see the delivery. And he said Nisar hit me on my thigh and he wasn't wearing a thigh pad. And he must have been rubbing his thigh in pain. He said Nisar walked down the pitch and he hugged me. And he said that was Muhammad Nisar. So, in his own way, he told me that, of course, there's been no greater fast bowler in the subcontinent than Muhammad Nisar. And he also told me that there's a human side. So, Karthik Bose was someone I kept seeing. 1975, they were playing some nominal, match at the Taltala cricket ground where Karthik Bose was present and Pankaj Roy was present. I saw Karthik Bose bat, and Karthik Bose at that time must have been in his 70s. The square drive that Karthik Bose played was a different class. I mean, I wouldn't say that I don't see that now, but for a 75-year-old to have batted the way he did is like Mushtaq Ali batting in 1980 at Eden Gardens, Fred Truman bowling to him. There was a CAB centenary match, was, half bicent, some, 50 years of, they had this exhibition match, and Mushtaq Ali late cut against Fred Truman. By God, that was something. Same class, Karthik Bose. So Karthik Bose and all these guys were people with interesting opinions, and he could talk to you about TC Longfield, 1938. Sadly, we never recorded all that. Sadly, we never sat them down and took down all that they had to say. All these are obliterated from people's memories because people have lost that.
So, but in terms of popularity, I mean, you have written about how in your community, cricket was always huge. But in Calcutta in general, was football still the main sport, or were there pockets where cricket was also huge when you were starting out?
Football was prime religion. And it was prime religion for two or three things. One, it had a long tradition behind it. The gentry, the affluent gentry, and they patronized football. Number two, football was built around club rivalries. And it was not just Mohun Bagan or East Bengal. See, it also was fostered by the fact that people who came from the other side of the border, which is Bangladesh today, they were largely supporters of East Bengal. And people who were from this part of Bengal were traditional supporters of Mohun Bagan. So based on these rivalries was founded the great football tradition of Bengal. The amazing thing was that we considered our footballers to be gods. That the class of those footballers was at a different level. Sadly, this myth got punctured in 1978 when the World Cup football was telecast live. And what happened as a result was that we saw Argentina win. So you had Leopoldo Luque, Mario Kempes, and we finally saw their standard. And I think we finally realized that the football being played in our Bengal backyard was really not of a very high standard. I think that was the great myth that got busted. And gradually I saw, you people who read about or hear about this will find it very funny that in the mid-70s, if East Bengal and Mohun Bagan were playing, our school was always give over early. Which means that our school, St. Xavier's, which normally would give over at 3:30, would give over at 2 o'clock or 1:30 only so that we guys could get home safe before the match started. Now, why is this important? Because given where Park Street was, everybody going towards, East Bengal ground or Mohan Bagan ground or Eden Gardens. In those days, they actually used to play in the Eden Gardens. Entire traffic was one-sided. Every bus, every tram, every taxi, every road was chock-a-block. And this started at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So schools would give up by 1:30. You got home safe. And there was another reason for the safety. Supposing if one team lost, and I do know for a fact that if any of the big three lost a match, bricks used to be sold at 5 rupees. Tickets used to be sold for 2 rupees, but bricks used to be sold at 5 rupees. So to keep students safe, students would be sent home early. This was the aura of football in Calcutta. Cricket was there, but cricket was a second. It wasn't at the same level of football. Partly because we never had our own champions. So we grew up idolizing all the other guys. So what happened was, whenever a cricketer from another city came to Calcutta, he may have been a good cricketer there. In Calcutta, he became a great cricketer. And if a great cricketer came from another city in Calcutta, he became a legend. Which means, I remember this Patrick Eager photograph of Oberoi Grand Hotel, 1982-83, no, 76-77, when the MCC had come. There is a crowd outside the Oberoi Grand. I have seen myself a crowd of 2,500, 3,000 people just standing there doing nothing. Their job was only to stand outside and just go back home in the evening and said, I saw Clive Lloyd. He got out of the Oberoi ground and he got into he got out of the Oberoi Grand and he got into a cab or he got into a car. Or I saw him pass in a car. That was the only job they had. 3,000 people from morning to night standing outside a hotel only to be able to go back to the neighborhood and say, I saw this cricketer in flesh and blood. So, Calcutta is a different class of obsession and passion. I don't think I've ever seen this kind of thing anywhere else in the world.
Oh, okay. So now that we are in Calcutta, let us also fast forward a bit to 1984 Eden Gardens. And I have to quote this, which is one of my favorite openings to a piece that anybody has written. And I will quote it in full. I start the quote. A quarter of a century ago, if an anonymous boy from an ekdam middle-class family could have looked outside his grilled window and woven visions of hitting a century match after match, leading his country, marrying an actress, and making it to the country's highest body of elected representatives, his mother might have yelled from the Bawarchi Khana, "Bewakoof, fir se sapna dekhta hai kya?" Okay, so Mudar, tell us about that moment and that test when you first saw, or maybe when Azharuddin made his test debut for India.
So I remember a couple of snatches of that. And I won't be dishonest enough to say that I remember everything about it, but I do remember a few things. One, an extremely oversized helmet. It wasn't something that was of his size. It was something much larger. And secondly, actually I had seen him 84. I would have seen him about 10 months earlier in Jamshedpur. He was playing a Dulip match. I happened to be reporting it. And I mentioned it in my copy. If I go back to 1984 February, I'll be able to extract it. That Azharuddin batted as if he had all the time. And they used to say this about Ranji, that he batted as if he had all the time in the world. And the other thing they used to say about Ranji was that he could, in the time that people take to play one stroke, he could play two. And I happened to write that, like Ranji, he had all the time to play. And, it would have sounded like a bloody exaggeration that here is a guy who's batting for, I think, South Zone. Hyderabad boy. Nobody had heard of him. He had definitely not played a test match. And you're comparing him to Ranji. So it would have sounded quite an exaggeration. But within 10 months or 11 months, he was actually playing for India. And I remember that when he was walking in to the Cricket Association of Bengal dinner, it sounds quite funny for me to say this now, but he had worn a tie that was so thick and it came at least and ended about 3 inches above his navel. Now, these things today, if you look back, it looks awkward for me to say, but when you look back within the prism of 1984, it spoke to me of a person who perhaps may not have been adept at wearing a tie, may not have bought a tie, and may not have been comfortable wearing it. So it also spoke of where he had come from in life. Now, he hit that century, and it was a big thing to happen, and then he scored two. I remember MJ Akbar calling me, and MJ Akbar, he would never come to our cubicle because our cubicles were adjoining. So Akbar sat, he was the editor of Sunday. And I remember one of the peons coming saying, Akbar Sahib Dakche. Akbar Sahib Dakche means, the summons have come. He wasn't my editor. My editor was Pataudi. But Akbar Sahib Dakche. So I said, he must be wanting something from me. I went, opened his room, knocked timidly and, opened the door. And Akbar scarcely looking up. And I went in. All he told me was, go to Hyderabad. That's all. Now, again, like that, you're going to Kanpur, it's quite like that. He didn't say anything more than that. You have to figure out what he meant by go to Hyderabad. He meant that you go to Hyderabad and interview Azharuddin. So effectively, I went to, even though they had Sunday reporters, Akbar had convinced himself that the only man who can do justice to this is the cricket reporter from Sportsworld. Now, technically, he should have gone through my editor, got his clearance. So all he said was, go to Hyderabad. So I arranged they arranged a ticket and stuff, and they finally carried a cover story on Sunday. I interviewed Azharuddin, I interviewed his dad, I got a flavor of his neighborhood and all that I did. But interestingly, middle class boy, and the amazing thing in those days was, his innings and all was there, that he had scored 3 centuries on the trot. The incredible thing was this thing that I think it was John Woodcock who wrote, that his paddle sweep. And he said, if you ask me to define perfection in sport, this is it. Because the sweep was one thing. What Azharuddin was doing, he wasn't sweeping, boss. He was hitting the paddle shot. Today, all this has become standard, boss. He was doing it in 1984-85. And he was doing it against Pat Pocock. Pocock would come in and bowl to him, and this guy was paddle sweep, and the ball would go directly behind the wicketkeeper. He said, this is John Woodcock writing about the fact that if you ask me to define perfection in sport, this is it. So these are the memories that one had of Azharuddin in 84-85.
Is it just a clarification? Is it Woodcock or Robin Marlar?
So you may be right. I was thinking in my mind it's perhaps maybe Marlar, but on last instant I said perhaps John Woodcock. So you may be right. It's probably Robin Marlar.
Yeah. Okay. I can anyway check that. But I must ask you, having seen the beginnings and having gone to Hyderabad and having seen where he came from, what was it like for you when you first heard or read about what happened in 1999 and late 90s with the fixing?
So somewhere I believe that. And this is after having read that excellent book by Harsha on Azhar. In a lot of ways, it was our story. Azhar's story is our story. And in some ways, it was a betrayal. Now, does it mean that he actually fixed? I don't know. Does it appear that he fixed? Certainly, some of the things did appear odd. But he appeared to be that virginal middle-class boy coming from... I think he was a man of destiny in some ways. And I think in later parts of his career were very, very controversial and completely at a contrast. And to that extent, it was... one finds words very difficult to describe exactly what one feels, but... what a man, what a cricketer, what a legend. If you've seen him bat against Lance Klusener in Eden Gardens and hit him for those 4 boundaries in 1 over, it's a memory that Eden Gardens cherishes till today. He didn't hit Lance Klusener for 4 fours. He dismissed Lance Klusener from his presence. And I think that was what Azharuddin was. And to think that one day that he would be accused of selling his country out, whether that happened, didn't happen, one wouldn't know. But the very fact that one raised that finger at him is itself damning, I think. I think that itself is the indictment. So I think to that extent, proved very disappointing.
Yeah. So back again. So you told us about Pakistan. and all your trips there, and at least touched upon Imran and things. But 83 was also your first trip to the West Indies, and of course you went there again in 89. But tell us about that.
No, I didn't go. I didn't go in 83, but I went in 89.
Oh, you didn't go in 83. Okay, my bad.
I didn't go into 83. I didn't go to in 83.
Okay, so but then 89, when you went to West Indies, which is like the a place where you find a story every 3 meters. Tell us about that.
So, I think, again, the inspiration of that West Indies tour and the way one would approach it, much of it had been derived from Another Bloody Day in Paradise by Frank Keating. I had read that book. I would say that book I had probably read backwards, because I had read it so many times that it had become a part of me, that I said, if I go to the West Indies, I must do justice to those countries the way Keating has done justice, which means go out and meet people beyond the cricket or beyond the ground. So I think one of the highlights of my entire visit, in fact, there were a number of highlights, but one of them was definitely going and meeting the daughter of Larry Constantine. And they were very nice. They invited me to the house in Port of Spain and spent a fair amount of time. His daughter actually spoke very extensively about the family's experience with racism, because Constantine had actually been a professional at Nelson. Nelson used to be a club in Lancashire. And this must have been around 1929 or 1930. In those days, England had not matured to what racism was. So effectively, she told me some very interesting descriptions of the kind of prejudice that they actually came up against. One of the things I still remember, I think on the first couple of days my father was in Nelson, people shook his hand and then they checked their palms to check whether the brown or the black had come off. So she said, I remembered this. And we spoke about a number of things. And then she said that, we've still retained all his diaries. So I said, I really want to see one. And, in the next room, all his diaries have been arranged chronologically. And by chance, I happened to pick out 1929 and I opened the page. And, it's just a coincidence. And it happened to be the month of April. And there in one line was written, arrived in Nelson. And I thought this was such an amazing coincidence. And to go, so I met Larry Constantine's daughter. I went and met Frank Worrell's widow. And she told me that there is a belief that Frank Worrell contracted leukemia when he came to India in 1966, as a result of which his daughter was turned off India for a very long time. She didn't ever want to come to this country. And she always held it against India that, perhaps dad contracted leukemia in 1966 in India.
And you also met Gary Sober's mother.
Very fleetingly outside their house, but not extensively. In fact, I was ghostwriting for Sir Gary as well on that tour, because he was writing for their features. And my job, one of my responsibilities was to ghost Sir Gary's column. So I had to actually spend time with him, understand exactly what he wanted to say, write that copy, show it to him, get it approved, and then transfer it to India. So I would see Sir Gary virtually every day across the series.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I must say that before I went to West Indies in 2006, I was, lucky enough to get access to the collection of Sportsworld from Clayton Murzello of Midday, who has also been on this podcast. And I actually read all your dispatches from the West Indies, which was a huge advantage for me because it allowed me a lot of good groundwork before I could go to West Indies.
So very happy to have gone to Subhash Gupta's house and the memories that he had, twinkling memory. Then, which is the other? Met a guy called Foffy Williams. Played for England in 1939. Played for West Indies against England in 1939. Of course, the more predictable interviews were with Clyde Walcott, Everton Weeks. But the one other interview which I thought was a very good one to have done was one with Rudy Webster, Dr. Rudy Webster. He was the person who was the psychoanalyst who turned Viv Richards around on that 1975-76 series against Australia. If you remember, in the first 4 test matches, Viv Richards didn't do much. In fact, he just about scraped 0-1-5 or whatever. And I think the last test, He hit about 153, if I'm not mistaken. And he described to me the turnaround of... and he's the psychoanalyst credited with having turned Viv Richards' career around.
Yeah, and in 2006, in fact, he was with the Indian team and he had a big role to play in Virender Sehwag as well, turning his game around. After
Very interesting. In those days, the advantage of the 1989 tour was it was pre-media. So, there were no electronic channels. And you had relatively few cricket writers. So some of these individuals who needed to be interviewed, they weren't under any pressure. They weren't being carpet bombed. So to that extent, if you identified and you had a good prospect, you could engage that individual in a reasonable conversation, go deep into a subject, and you could even befriend some of them. So you actually had Wes Hall. Wes Hall is one guy who never gave an interview, but what a presence! Yeah, what a presence! And one day I remember it was Charlie Griffith, or was it Gilchrist, walking into the press box, and it was interesting. I remember once the first game that I saw in Antigua, one man coming into the press box, and rather not just the press box, going into the stands and collecting money for the groundsmen, was Joel Garner. I couldn't believe it. I said, in India, the guy would have been mobbed, his clothes would have been torn off, he wouldn't have been able to collect even 1 rupee. But look at the quiet dignity with which Joel Garner is going right through the stands and collecting money for the groundsmen. I found that very touching and very interesting insight into how West Indians live. This is another memory of that trip. I remember in Antigua, there was this photographer called Colin Cumberbatch. And Colin had told me that you come to Antigua, man, I'll take you to the beach and we play cricket. We'll swim. So I said, okay. So in Antigua, he took me to the beach. Now, in Antigua, there are 365 beaches. 365 beaches on that small island. So they have one particular beach called St. James. And we started playing cricket. And so in cricket was 2 or 3 people, bowl fast, and the ball comes, skids of the beach. When the tide runs out and there's a little moistness left in the sand, that ball skids of the so-called pitch. So I was batting, and suddenly, I must have batted for an over or two. I casually turned around to look towards the sea. Between the wicket and the sea, there's somebody standing at second slip, and that happens to be Isaac Vivian Alexander Richards. And Viv Richards was the captain during the series. He was taking a break. So Viv Richards came, bowled to me, batted, fielded in the slips, and we were not more than 5 guys playing. Only 5 people and nobody else. No spectators, nothing. 5 people playing beach cricket. I was one of them. So these are the incredible memories of the West Indies tour.
And you did write about it, right?
Sorry?
You did write a piece about that, right? The beach cricket.
I wrote a piece, I took photographs, but it sounds today like make-believe, but it actually happened. It actually happened. For them, it's very usual for them. It's very usual. This is not something which is out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and I think it continues even to this day. I mean, there's something about the West Indian appreciation for cricket that goes well beyond hero worship. It's like the boys next door, and they treat them like that. And
I remember in Port of Spain, I did an interview with a man whose name is now virtually forgotten, Charlie Davis. And 1971, now this is where again my old Sports Week memories came in handy, because that's the one name we would always keep reading. Charlie Davis, Sunil Gavaskar. Charlie Davis, 3 people actually. Charlie Davis, Sunil Gavaskar, Dilip Sardesai. So Charlie Davis was the West Indian hero because he scored so heavily. So I said, I must track Charlie Davis down. So I tracked Charlie Davis down. And Charlie Davis was very kind enough to come to our hotel, the Sabina Park Hotel. No, sorry. The Queen's Park Oval Hotel. And very nice of him to come. He asked me, why have you hunted me out? So I told him why. That is my memories of the old and 1971 tour. Then after that, he was absolutely okay. He told me about his fetish. Most of us have funny cravings and funny fetishes. Charlie Davis told me about his fetish for Coca-Cola. He said he would have 30 or 35 bottles a day. He was addicted. So he told me then gradually how he got out of it. But the conversations became interesting. This is what the conversations were all about. The idea was not just to do a cricket tour. The idea was to go and get a flavor of that country. It wasn't one country. There were a number of countries. the idea was to go and get a flavor of these countries, the flavor of the people. What kind of people are they? How relaxed are these? And of course, at the back of everything was Frank Keating's Another Bloody Day in Paradise.
Yeah, I remember that piece on Charlie Davis. In fact, you even mentioned that the Coca-Cola company then decided to sponsor him or something like that.
Yeah, they were intrigued by this guy who would just keep guzzling Coca-Cola. He said it was an addiction that I couldn't get out of. So he said even when I traveled, I would take my quota of Coca-Cola bottles because somewhere the taste differed also. He said I would carry my bottles around. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
Okay, so then at 89, West Indies, but also Pakistan. And one of the, of course, there was Tendulkar in Pakistan, but one of the recurring themes of both those tours was Sanjay Manjrekar. And at that point of time, Manjrekar was in fact considered the best batsman and perhaps the next great Indian batsman. What are your memories of him back then?
I would say completely. I mean, if you take 1989, West Indies as well as Pakistan, Manjrekar was supposed to be the next Gavaskar. See, Tendulkar had not yet emerged. So Manjrekar was a guy who had scored double centuries. He scored big hundreds. So, I remember one particular match. This must have been St. Vincent. And he was batting against Patrick Patterson and the Indian team, very pathetic score. But Manjrekar scored 36 on that terrible wicket. And all of us felt that, there's something happening. If this man can score 36 standing up to Patrick Patterson, this guy must be amazing. And sure enough, I think next match he scored a double century. And what do I remember of him in Pakistan? I actually remember him singing. I don't know, most people are not aware, Manjrekar is an absolutely outstanding singer. He doesn't sing the halka kalam. He sings heavy stuff. So I remember we had this Sunday club in Pakistan because, the other thing in Pakistan is nothing to do socially here. What do you do? So I suggested to Kapil that let's create a Sunday club here. So idea is that we'll pool people in and we'll pool some money and we'll do some crazy stuff together. He said, yeah, great, let's do it. So we got along, and in the Sunday club, we asked Manjrekar to sing. So I remember Manjrekar with lipstick on his lips, tied around his head. He sang Ranjishi Sahi Dil Hi Dukhane Ke Liya, Mehdi Hasan. And at one point, I actually felt it might have been Mehdi Hasan singing. He was that good. I think somewhere later also he sung, not professionally, but he sung at serious platforms. But that day, everyone just shut up and heard him sing the entire Ranjishi Sahi. He was very good.
Wow.
On that trip also, we got Gavaskar. We also got Gavaskar to record a calypso. So you know what? Because Manjrekar kept batting. So I said, I must do a takeoff. And I got the lyrics of Lord Relator's. They couldn't get Gavaskar out at all. They couldn't out Gavaskar at all. And I wrote a calypso in honor of Manjrekar. Now, that could have been just an usual, anyone could have done it. So I told Gavaskar, can you record it for me? So Gavaskar said, okay, give me a recorder. So I gave him a recorder and I gave him a cassette. And Gavaskar said, tomorrow you collect it from me. You know what Gavaskar did? He took it to his hotel bathroom. And there, in that silence and the resonation, he recorded it and gave it to us the next day. Now, the sad part is that I don't know where that cassette has disappeared. This is where I feel that, shucks, if I'd been a bit more careful, that would be archival, yeah. I forgot that. I don't know where it's gone, yeah.
Oh, man. Now you have really made me feel very bad that all these things are lost completely. I mean,
this is lost, and the other one that I lost was in 1982. I'd gone to interview Dr. Jahangir Khan because he played for India in the 1932 Test at Lords. I had recorded I knew it was an important interview, so I had recorded the entire interview on my cassette. You won't believe what happened thereafter. I brought it to India. Everything was okay. You also, in those days, the cassettes used to have a lug. If you knocked the lug off, you couldn't overwrite on the cassette. So the cassette was protected. One day, I got into my head and the neighbors, all the boys in my neighborhood, they said there's this young girl called Nazia Hassan and she sings damn well. Let's record her. I said, yeah, I've got a spare cassette. I put tape over that lug and re-recorded and knocked the entire recording of Dr. Jahangir Khan out.
Oh my
I
God.
can't believe what an ass I've been here. That would have been truly archival. Because you know what? Not many people today would have voice recordings of Dr. Jahangir Khan describe that first test match at Lords. He also described the Sparrow incident, when he bowled and the Sparrow died,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he eventually got embalmed. He described everything to me. He described crossing the border. He described the fact that they came from a village from near Jalandhar. They described the families, the way they came and settled down in Zaman Park. All that would have been truly archival. All gone. So today, of course, his voice is not there, but the copy is there. The interview was carried in Sportsworld. But boss, the voice would have been something else.
So, so it's the young man in you chose Nazia Hassan over Jahangir Khan, I guess.
Yeah, it was indiscretion of youth. Yeah. Indiscretion of youth. Very, very bad indiscretion of youth.
But the thing about Manjrekar
good.
is, one thing at least that survives at Manjrekar is the lyrics. And Shekhar Gupta has quoted it in a column of his about the song and how Maninder Singh and Razdan, Sidhu in a turban, Kapil Dev and Ravi Shastri and all that. So I will link that. I will link that piece.
So maybe maybe the lyrics are there in the old Sportsworld copies also. Maybe it lies in my collection as well. But it's very nice of him to remember. Sadly, if I could have had access to that, the Calypso, that would have been something else. Yeah. Maybe it gives me an idea that I'm going to write to Gavaskar and say that, these are the lyrics. You had recorded this for me in 1989 November. Would you mind doing it 31 years later? He might just say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? And then we'll have a legendary bit of recording.
So if you send me the lyrics, I'll probably send this request to him and ask him to read it.
I will.
And now it's going to be so much easier. He can just do it on the cell phone and send it to me, and then it becomes a small file which I can just send back to you.
Absolutely. And it also should remind you, or at least let me nudge you towards writing your memoirs. Look at the number of stories you have. What is this? We cannot lose your stories.
I sometimes feel that nobody's going to read or listen. No, nobody's got time. These are all prehistoric. Yeah.
Mudar, let me just tell you what some great writers have already said. When you have great secrets, put them in a book. So that's all I will say.
I mean, you'll get the readership over many years. This is like Forrest Gump's story. I'm listening to him. He's ghosted Imran Khan, ghosted Gary Sobers, played cricket with Mushtaq Ali.
Played cricket with Viv Richards.
This is just crazy coincidences all falling in a short span.
I'll give you one more anecdote. Of 1991-92. I'd gone to Pune and I said, let me go and interview Professor Devdhar. Because Professor Devdhar was 100 years old, 99 years old at that time. And of course, Professor Devdhar, being Professor Devdhar, he dismissed Tendulkar. He said, this boy can't bat like C, can I do? And all that he said. I said, maybe that this is age getting the better of him. But then I asked him for some memorabilia. He said, yes, I have something. It is a thigh pad. And this was given to me by Jack Hobbs in 1931. He had come with Vizianagaram's team, Sutcliffe and Hobbs. You do one thing. You ask your friend to come next week. Give him a covering letter. Ask him, I will give him the thigh pad. The thigh pad, I've got a little museum at home. The thigh pad of Sir Jack Hobbs is there in my collection at home today.
Wow. Oh, wow.
If I had stuck around in cricket, I would have deepened my interest in memorabilia and I would have actually set up a very serious museum on Indian cricket, which I definitely wanted to do at that time. But sadly, my visibility in Indian cricket progressively declined and I couldn't sustain my... Visibility was the only thing. I mean, I couldn't possibly go up to a Dravid and ask him for his thigh guard. He wouldn't even know who I was. So I think that was the one setback. Otherwise, this Indian cricket memorabilia museum would have become a reality for BCCI by now.
Wait, you're saying you think Rahul Dravid doesn't know who you are?
No, maybe, but I wouldn't be able to get access to him as easily as I would have been able to.
Come on, what are you talking about?
Maybe
he has definitely read you. Come on, what are you talking about?
No, I'm just saying that you need visibility to... So I sometimes get into my head that I must write to Saurabh and tell him that I can set up a great museum in Eden Gardens. A little like Lords, because I think Lords are a different class altogether. But it's possible. You need one madman to be working on that subject for 20 years and then finally get something going. But, I've written a message to him and got no reply. Then I said, no, maybe he hasn't seen my email. But maybe one day I'll again write to him. You never know. If I get a 20-year run on one subject, whether it's in CCI, whether it's in Eden Gardens, I think we can definitely do it. Much of the riches of this country should remain. So the reason I say this is that in the year 1991, there was a gentleman who offered me a collection. He said, you come and have a look at my collection. A Gujarati gentleman in Calcutta. So I went and looked at his collection. It turned out to be Duleep's collection. So I said, how the hell did you get Duleep's collection? He said, I have my contacts all over. Somebody gave me this. So I said, let me go through it. It contained letters by Gandhi to Duleep. It contained letters from Ranji to Duleep. It contained letters from Jardine to Duleep before the Bodyline series. It contained letters, the vast number of names, Pelham Warner to Duleep, the works. And this was an entire carton full of letters and photographs and stuff. So I said, look, I really want to buy this off. In 1991, I had very little. My net worth was negligible. He said, I'll sell it to you for 1 lakh. I didn't have 1 lakh. So I let it go. He finally gave it to Sussex County Cricket Club. And I think today, the entire collection of Duleep is there in Sussex County Cricket. It contained his passports. It contained a small envelope, which I still remember, because Gandhi in those days wrote in pencil. Gandhi had probably gone for the Round Table Conference of 1930, and the Ashes series was going on at that time. And Gandhi just wrote to Duleep saying, will come. Signed MK. That's all. And I saw that envelope.
Okay. So let me come, before I get to the final bit, let me come to a few games which I hope you're okay on time, Mudar. I don't want to stretch you too much.
No issue at all.
Okay. So I have to ask you about three, let me just stick to three thrilling moments of the mid-80s that you were there for. One was that Australasia Cup where Miandad hit that 6 to win them the game. And talk us about that game, that series, and also about cricket in Sharjah at that time. It must have been like something... people must have gone really berserk about watching cricket back then.
I remember that that particular match was interesting because the press box and the Pakistani dressing room were virtually adjacent. So if they walked out of the dressing room, they had to pass the press box. You could see them. You could see them talking. Not many people will remember one masterstroke. Everybody remembers Miandad 6. What they won't remember is the fact that Abdul Qadir was promoted in the batting order and Abdul Qadir was a game changer. You see, until that point, Miandad, in fact, for the first 100 runs, I don't think Miandad scored a century, hit a boundary or something. Maybe very few. He only kept picking singles and twos, singles and twos, singles and twos. And I think the score that India was wanting to protect was about 245 or 246, if I'm not mistaken. And Miandad played a very muted game. Abdul Qadir came in as the game changer and he completely turned the match around by hitting a straight 6. And suddenly everybody said, oh my God, it looks like, the Pakistanis have a match going for themselves. And Imran standing always outside the dressing room, which is adjacent to the press box, watching the match from there. And when Miandad hit that 6, everybody ran out into the ground. They brought him back and it took a number of minutes for them to come back into the dressing room. We were all there. One could just see what was happening. At the end of it, I think he couldn't walk properly because so many people have climbed over him and, somebody had probably walked over his thigh. He was limping. That evening was the dinner. When he walked into that dinner, and the dinner was on a poolside dinner, the entire crowd, the audience, they were all select people who had been invited, virtually stood up in a standing ovation for the man here. I think looking back these 34 years, I think it was a great thing that Pakistan won the match. And, it's very ironic and awkward for an Indian to say so. But if you see it from the prism of cricket, I think if Pakistan had lost the match, no Indian would even remember that we won. But the very fact that Pakistan won the match, Indians have never forgotten that we lost. And to that extent, it is seen as a turning point in India's cricket history. Remember, previous to that, we had won the World Cup in '83. We had won the champion of champions in Australia in 1985. But in '86, when this happened, it marked a turning point, and that turning point, they say, got another turning point when Tendulkar hit Shoaib Akhtar out of the ground at Centurion in South Africa. So, see how the wheel turns full circle. But I think if you look at it from the cricket perspective, it was a great thing for the game that Miandad hit that six and Pakistan won the match.
Yeah, and it's often forgotten that it was Pakistan's first multi-nation victory. So that was a big, big deal for them as well in terms of purely cricketing victories. So
if I were to describe it, I would probably say that Pakistaniyat that you talk about is a lot of that originates with that 1-6. The feeling that, we can do it as a country when you see it from their perspective. And that one man swung their entire nation and gave it its identity and its personality. Otherwise, remember in '85, they were defending 123 or something like that, and they lost that. They got bowled out for 81 with Gavaskar picking up those 5 catches and stuff in Sharjah. So they never believed they could pull this off against India. And again, when when India scored 245 and they were in a bit of a problem, again the same demons were back. That Pakistan can't make it. And here this guy goes, last ball, and he hits a 6. It's after that, the destiny for that country from a cricketing nation changed. That's why they felt they should have won the World Cup.
In '87, absolutely. Yeah. And they were the best team in '87, no doubt. So, but talking about destiny though, while it worked out so well for Pakistan, poor Chetan got associated fully with that, Chetan Sharma. And Chetan Sharma actually...
It's like Malcolm Nash, Malcolm Nash gets hits for 6 in and over. That becomes his claim to fame. Claim to infame. But so it is with Chetan Sharma. Imagine if he had bowled a Yorker and Miandad had just been able to nudge it for 2. We'd always remember him in the same way we remembered Tendulkar, who bottled up Macmillan in the Hero Cup final.
Yeah, and the irony is that Chetan Sharma was actually having a good time then, because he helped India win a series in England. He had a very good 1987 World Cup with that hat-trick and things. But then this one moment is connected to him for always.
He would still be, in fact, even today when people do speak to him, probably even in a reasonable conversation, they're probably going to bring up this particular delivery. One ball.
One ball. Okay, so the next game I want to talk about is the tide test in Madras. And the last day and the drama that must have been there at that time, back when the press box was outdoors and I guess the heat would have been unbearable. How was it? What are your memories of that day?
So I must confess that I wasn't there for the match.
I'm sorry.
When I went back, the next match was in Delhi. And I remember that in Delhi, I went around interviewing every single journalist who was present. I told them that, what you've seen is history. How would you describe it? And everybody gave me such fascinating perspectives. But, I wasn't there for the test. And what I did was I interviewed all the journalists and created my own story thereafter. But I wasn't there in flesh and blood.
Wow. Okay. Wonderful. And the third test I will...
Cindy, I had to intervene here slightly to go on a tangent. Is that why you don't like Chepauk? No,
I'm sorry?
In the piece that you wrote about Eden Gardens after the Shah Rukh scene in Wankhede, where you said, come to Calcutta, let's make it special. You kind of skip Chennai and move on when you talk about the great grounds. So I was just curious about your relationship with Chepauk.
I've, in fact, very ironically, never seen a match at that ground. It's because maybe in my Sportsworld days, we had a representative in Chennai to report. So it was always like intruding on his turf if you went and reported a match from Chennai. So sadly, I've never been able to report a match from Chepauk.
So the other historic match, of course, that you must tell us about is '89 in Pakistan, when Tendulkar played, and the whole Tendulkar debut series. Any fond memories of that? And the
big memories are not there because sadly he didn't score big. For a man who's done so much in his career, he didn't score a century on debut. But I do remember that we were, the Karachi press box is very distant from the ground. It's right on the upper levels. I exited the press box And I found my way right down to sit as close to the ground as possible. I remember that because somewhere I had this, I won't call it premonition, but I felt that a 16-year-old, if he's going to play his first test, it's special. And number two, by then Sportsworld had already done a cover story on him and had written about the fact that this guy, in his the size and the magnitude of his scoring, comes very close to Bradman. So that sense of history was there. And I said, 16 years old, sense of history, Bradman-esque. There's something about this. I shouldn't miss these moments. I don't think he scored too many. I don't think he even got into double digits. I think got out for 9. But I think I went down and virtually recorded every delivery that he played. And then finally just stayed in my notebook. Next couple of test matches, he did better. But more important is that on that tour, one engaged with him in the Sunday club, of course, where we, got him to dress like a girl and we made up his face and, we put lipstick on his lips and all that we did. And I think it was Sialkot. It rained. We had nothing to do. The press box was again it was adjacent to the pavilion. And we played cricket, indoor cricket. So he was obsessed. He got any opportunity to play cricket. Wherever he found, he got a ball and he would so they would play hand cricket. So Manjrekar and he would keep playing hand cricket. So if they were not playing cricket in the ground because it was raining, they would be playing hand cricket in the pavilion. So at that time, Srikanth would say this guy is a bit of a nutcase. He'll sleepwalk and at night when he's asleep in his hotel room, he keeps talking about bat and middling and all that. So, this amused sense of awe and wonder had already emerged about Tendulkar. And nobody knew that he was going to become a great cricketer or something. And I remember Kapil Dev's wives telling me that look how sweet he is as a boy. I remember Kapil Dev walking out of the pavilion, seeing this guy playing hand cricket, would first go up to him, put his hand right through his head and squeeze his cheeks. I've actually seen Kapil Dev squeeze Tendulkar's cheeks. He was a kid, 16-year-old. So everybody, treated him like, your youngest brother that you have in the team. They probably treated like that also by many of them.
Wonderful. So, early 90s, I think, if I'm not wrong, is when you decided to quit full-time cricket. Am I right?
1990, July. I was supposed to be going to England. Remember, we were going to England in 1990. The famous series where Azharuddin was captain and Bedi was the manager.
Yes.
And my tickets were virtually booked to go to England. I told in all fairness, I told them that, look, I think I'll be resigning once I return. So they said, if you're going to go and come back and resign, we'd rather not send you. So I said, then the call is really yours. So effectively, they called off my visit. And I would have loved to go to England. I had all plans scheduled that I'm going to this city, I'll do this city, I'll do this, apart from just the cricket. But, it never happened. And my employer on the stock market also insisted that I join as soon as I could. And sadly, the two worlds never converged. And I just had to make my choice.
So what was the impetus? Or is it something that you'd given yourself a certain time to do this? Or what was the impetus?
I'd got too fascinated by the stock market. I'll tell you, fundamentally, I saw cricket as a game being played by 22 individuals. Stock market, I saw it as a game being played by maybe a couple of thousand listed players, a couple of thousand listed companies. So the number of players was larger. And each one had a personality, each one had a character. I also felt that the markets were completely under-researched. If you spoke about investing in a certain company, you just didn't know enough about them. So I felt it was a great opportunity. I was bang on right, incidentally. In fact, in those days, the number of researchers on the stock markets, you could probably count them on the fingers of 3 or 4 hands. That's all. For a country. I said, this is great fun. And I was so fascinated by the fact that you could actually research companies, commodities, sectors to be able to predict what's going to happen to their stocks. And here in cricket, I didn't have a skin in the game. I was just a reporter. I could just report on 22 cricketers and come back, but I couldn't possibly identify the next Bradman. I couldn't buy stocks of the next Bradman and make a killing 5 years later. When I could possibly, I couldn't buy into a Brian Lara in 1989 and say that 5 years down the road, boss, I'm going to make a great killing because Lara is going to become the next great Bradman. I couldn't possibly monetize that. So somewhere I felt that it was a little limiting. Stock markets appeared to be far more compelling as an alternative. So I felt that the challenge was much more, and I felt I had to move on. And I felt also that let me make a lot of money on stocks and then be able to finance my interest in cricket. Then I'd be open to going to watch cricket anywhere in the world without a magazine deciding whether it should send me or not. But you know what? When I got seduced by the stock market, I got seduced all right. I just didn't have time for cricket thereafter. And that's how it remains. That's how it remains.
I think Mahesh, who is also, deals in and also trades, might agree with this sentiment, finding your cricket obsession with the money you make in the stock market?
Yeah, but unfortunately or fortunately, I never did the full-time first. So for me, I'm still holding on to that. I still use some of the money that I earn to go around the world and watch cricket. In fact, I was planning to go to Sri Lanka for the England series that was due. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, it's not happening. But the plan is the same because I didn't have the 10 years of Sportsworld experience and I'm implementing them.
So I'll tell you another thing that happened, and maybe my exit was at the right time. I think the world of the media changed. I think the room to write romantic cricket, the room to write a spacious and leisurely lyrical style of cricket, that evolved because I think the pace of cricket accelerated. And I think reportage became more about getting the next quote and the next bite and didn't become as much of writing and getting into... I mean, if I were to ask, would a Neville Cardis would have been able to survive today? He would have, provided he had a Manchester Guardian to back him. So, you need the right media platform for somebody to write romantic cricket stuff. Cricket at the end of the day is not just a game, it's an art form. Look, the art form and cricket writing is also an art form. Sadly, I feel that the room for the art form has declined. The cricket writing that space for the art form has declined. And I also believe that the game is accelerated to the point where everyone, every individual, every player has become virtually a statistic. And I think the game has been shorn of its characters. Even Srikanth, Srikanth was an absent-minded batsman. He would do crazy things. He was a character. Sadly, today, those characters have declined.
I mean, the craving for storytelling remains, right? It's just, as you say, I guess it's difficult to monetize the kind of writing that we're talking about, which is why editors and publications are wary. But otherwise, I think the space for it and the demand for it remains, because occasionally you will find this really long and terrific piece on someone and people will lap it up. I mean, they may not lap it up in the millions, but they will still lap it up to the extent that they are deeply moved by it.
So I do accept that online, and I do say Cricinfo is possibly one of the few platforms that gives that kind of latitude. Well, I'm just saying that the newspapers that I read, the physical newspapers that I read in the morning, I don't see that kind of spaciousness and that kind of burst there. I see it more on the online stuff, and I see, when somebody sends me a link, oh, this is appeared here, this is appeared. I think to that extent, there is still some kind of a latitude left for great romantic cricket writing. But is it happening in the print media? I can't remember the last print media article. Well, okay, I read some of the columns that some of the ex-cricketers write, but great romantic reportage, I don't remember for years anybody having done that.
Well, hopefully there can be a time when that can be done, and maybe there will be some benevolent editor as well as benevolent owners who will be willing to pump in some money for this. But let me ask you a question about one piece, in fact, which was carried in Wisden Asia Cricket in the early 2000s. And this was after you had left Sportsworld, and this was during you had written about the 92-93 England-India series, when your relationship with your aging father had really blossomed during that time. Can you talk a bit about that? I wish I could link the piece, but it's not online. But can you talk a bit about that piece?
My father had played competitive cricket in Surat before migrating to Calcutta, and he played competitive cricket for Mohammedan Sporting as an opener when he migrated here as well. I think in our community in Calcutta, he was one of the evangelists in selecting the Maidan place where the community could play cricket. So he bought a lot of his, I would say his, he was the kind of person who would never talk about cricket or your commitment to cricket. He would never use words like commitment to cricket. He referred to it as khidmat, and I think that's the kind of engagement he had with the sport. So he belonged to an older generation. He was in fact I was a late child, so there was a gap of a number of years. So gradually, while I was still a teenager, he was an older gentry. He's also a man of a different generation, not only chronologically, but also psychologically and emotionally. So we never quite got along. But I do know that he suffered a paralytic stroke in the early 90s and never quite recovered thereafter. But even those days while he was paralyzed, he would still watch cricket, and he would engage with the game, and he would keep asking about Sidhu. And so though his speech was slurred and he couldn't use one half of his body, I think the only thing that kept him going intellectually, emotionally, psychologically was cricket. Because the rest, he couldn't engage with football, or that was alien to him. But he kept himself engaged with cricket. And I think who scored what, how much did Sidhu score, these are the little things that became a very big thing in his childlike mind. And I think to that extent, cricket was a flame that kept cricket was an interest that kept the flame of his life going. And I remember Harsha would, in the late 80s, would come and stay at our residence in Calcutta, and he developed an engagement with my dad as well. So when Harsha wrote, he would write about this to my dad, he wrote letters to me. In those days, we used to write letters. But I remember that when my father started watching cricket after his paralytic stroke, I think he perked up. He became a little more alive than usual. And I think it was cricket that did that for him. A lot of, we expect that there's only just so much that a physiotherapist can do. There's only so much that a physiotherapist can do to an ailing limb or an ailing body. But, there's so much more that the magic of an old game could do in his mind, because it could trigger emotions, it could trigger memories. And I think that's what the flicker of a Sidhu on a television screen did that for his memory. And I think to that extent, it kept him perked up and alive. And I think that's what I wrote about. That my engagement with my father went through the prism of cricket, and it improved to the point that I would say I fell in love with my father all over again. I would say that very responsibly. It's not that I wasn't ever in love with him. It never was manifested. But after he was paralyzed, and through the prism of cricket, I discovered that I actually quite loved him.
So the last question I had was about, we all often ask our guests, especially people who are into reading cricket, for one book recommendation. So anything that you could give our listeners about a book that you feel they should read will be great.
I found Another Bloody Day in Paradise very interesting, because it is written in a very spunky style. Though the series wasn't anything great, but written in a style that made it spunky to read, and it excited me. So that's a book that I keep going back to. There's always a CLR James which has been beyond a boundary. But you know what, I'll be very honest, I haven't read it too often in life. So I can't keep saying, but I would say Another Bloody Day in Paradise by Frank Keating. If there's any book by Frank Keating, I generally pick it up and read, because I think his descriptive capability is at a different level completely.
So this was about the 81 England tour to West Indies,
That's right? Yes. And to that extent, it's a very limited perspective on just one series. But I think the way he's treated the book, but more than the treatment, I think the way he's written it, I keep coming back to this freshly youthful, spunky, irreverent writing. I think that's fascinating. And I think I've always wanted to write like that. I always felt that if I could infuse my writing with that kind of irreverence, the ability to look at things a little laterally, the ability to describe things differently, this is what I would have wanted to be.
Yeah, I think the tribute to that book by Frank Keating was that in 1986, Francis Edmonds wrote a book, Another Bloody Tour, about the 1986 tour and trying to sort of mimic how Keating had done it. Obviously not as good, but still it's, as they say, imitation is the best form of flattery.
So clearly influenced by Another Bloody Day in Paradise. So I have it in my collection at home. Very prominently there. I could have always kept it in a carton or in a trunk, but no. This book is, if you are ever wanting to pick yourself up for 5 minutes, just go to that book, read it, and put it back.
Wonderful. So I must tell our listeners that Mudar also, he has touched upon it, but also has I've not seen it, but supposed to have a wonderful library and a collection of memorabilia and a mini museum of sorts in his house. So maybe someday I will get a chance to visit and take a look at that.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. In fact, I must tell you this, that I have the stump that was used in the 1932 Test match at Lord's.
Oh, wow.
The 12th man was a gentleman called Godambe. So Godambe gave it to Madhav Mantri years later, and Madhav Mantri gave it to me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, anyone in the BCCI listening to this, please consider forming a museum with the help of Mudar, if he is willing, of course. So
the president of the BCCI doesn't live more than 8 kilometers from my house.
Yeah, yes. So if anyone who knows the president of the BCCI is listening to this, please let him know.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. This was fantastic, Mudar. Thank you so much for everything.
You.
And
entirely my pleasure.
I'll send you the lyrics to that Manjrekar thing and I'll keep in touch.
Yeah, please. Please do.
Okay,
Grateful.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
He'll come back for the second. India have won the Test match. India have won the series.
They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wild.